Oh, hello. I was just cleaning my book collection. I'm getting ready to sell all of my books because I realize I've been so self absorbed and lazy, spending so much time reading and watching movies when there's so much housework and cooking to be done. And I know you're here today because you want to hear me talk about the book and the movie, The Stepford Wives. And I have so much vacuuming and laundry and the shining of the silver. And I really don't have time, but since you're already here, I guess I can save the laundry for tomorrow, or maybe I'll just stay up extra late to make sure I get it done. But since you're here, let's go ahead and talk about the Stepford Wives. Hello, and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I'm talking about The Stepford Wives by Ira Levin, published in 1972, and I'm comparing it primarily with the 1975 movie, which is directed by Brian Forbes. This is my first edition copy of the book, very proud to own that one. And then I am also very proud to own my Suntup Press edition of The Stepford Wives. So I will link to Suntup Press down below, but they make incredible books. The illustrations are always fantastic. And then just the quality of the books are always so amazing. And it has that pink slipcase. And then the book itself is pink. And yeah, they just make fantastic books. So I highly recommend you check out Suntup Press and specifically their edition of The Stepford Wives. And while this video will focus primarily on the 70s movie, I also will have a section near the end talking about the 2004 remake directed by Frank Oz. But I am saving that for the end because it is very different from the book and original movie. And then also there is a 2022 movie. It doesn't claim to be a Stepford remake. And yet it is a lot like The Stepford Wives. And so at this point right now, I'm not going to name the movie because to name the movie and saying it's like The Stepford Wives ruins the spoiler reveal in the end. But when I talk specifically about it in the end, I will of course call it by name. But if you don't want a 2022 movie spoiled, you can skip over that part using the timestamps down below. But I have now read this book twice, and I have seen the 70s and the 2000s movie about 3 times each, I would guess at this point, multiple times. And I love the book. I highly recommend it. And then the 70s movie is also incredible. I recommend that as well. And then honestly, the 2000s movie is kind of a guilty pleasure for me. And it's bad for so many reasons and it has so many issues, and yet I enjoy watching it. And Nicole Kidman is also fantastic. She has a scene where she expresses like 10 different emotions over the course of 10 seconds. And then we just have a great cast too, because it also has Glenn Close and Christopher Walken. And so yeah, even though it has a lot of problems, I honestly would kind of recommend that one too. Although maybe one of the reasons I like it is also for nostalgia reasons, because I do remember watching it back when it came out before I had seen the 70s version. But yeah, so basically for my spoiler-free section, I would recommend all of these. And from here on out, I will get into the details of the plot, which means there will be spoilers going forward. So both book and movie follow Joanna Eberhardt, who, along with her husband, Walter, and their 2 kids, have left the city to move to the suburban neighborhood of Stepford. And once there, Joanna sees how the women are all obsessed with housework and they look incredible and have no interest in socializing, while the men have their secret men's association, which the women are not allowed to be part of. And long story short, the husbands are killing their wives and replacing them with literal robots. So after a family has been living there for 4 months, that's the amount of time it takes to create a robot, because after 4 months, they kill the woman and replace her with a very lifelike replica, which always looks amazing, dresses beautifully. She keeps a pristine house. She's a very dutiful wife to the husband and always cooks amazing meals and is just the quote unquote ideal submissive wife. And in the book, when Joanna first arrives to Stepford, she's very upset about the men's association, right? Because it's so sexist and ridiculous. And so she is going around to different houses trying to drum up some activity amongst the women to try to create their own group. And she sees how the women all claim that they have no time because they spend so much time cleaning and cooking that they have no time for anything else. We don't see this in the movie though, because when Joanna first shows up, she meets her neighbor, but she doesn't have interactions with all of the other women right away. But in both, a woman named Bobbi reads about Joanna in the local paper and reaches out to her. And Bobbi is a normal woman who is relieved to have found another woman who isn't like the other wives. And so the two become fast friends. And in the movie, once she meets Bobbi is when they start reaching out to the other women to try to create their own group. And yeah, she sees that none of the women have any interests outside of their housely duties, aside from one, a woman named Charmaine who loves tennis and astrology. And so Charmaine, Bobbi, and Joanna all become friends. And we hear more in the book about how they hang out all the time and they'll like go out and, do lunch in the city or whatever. And so the three of them become best friends. We see them interact in the movie as well, but I think the friendship with Charmaine is talked about more so in the book. But in both book and movie, Charmaine has a weekend getaway with her husband. And when she returns, Bobbi and Joanna see that she is having the tennis court ripped up so that her husband can put in a pool. And she has become just like all of the other wives who no longer care about her previous interests, including tennis and astrology, and now she only wants to please her husband. And Bobbi was already freaked out by how the women in Stepford were, and yet seeing this happen in real time to Charmaine really upsets her, of course. And so she starts looking at houses outside of Stepford wanting to move, and her husband has agreed that they can move. However, she is too late, and she too ends up becoming like the other wives, much to Joanna's horror. And Bobbi and Charmaine were so great when they were normal, and so seeing them undergo this change is just so horrible for the reader as well. Especially Bobbi, because she had a real fear, and she would tell Joanna, like, if I don't get out of here soon, I'm going to become like that, and I don't want to lose who I am. And so just seeing how scared she is of becoming like them, only to see her become like them, it was heartbreaking. And also it makes you so angry at the husbands, Walter and Bobbi's husband in particular, because Joanna and Bobbi talk to their husbands asking to move, and both husbands agree. And they're just like, oh, like, thank you. You're so wonderful. I'm so glad you're okay with moving. But we know that the husbands are only placating the wives because the husbands know, like, oh, I just need to put up with her wanting to move for like another week or whatever. And then she'll be turned into a robot and I won't have to worry about it. And so they're just giving their wives this false hope and false sense of security. And I did want to mention I loved the performance by Paula Prentice as Bobbi. She just has so much personality and is a breath of fresh air, especially in the book, because at this point Joanna has met the other wives. But yeah, she gave a great performance in the movie and really captured the spirit of book Bobbi. And in the book, I wasn't sure if Walter knew ahead of time what was happening in Stepford, or if he just moved there innocently and had no idea until they were already there. I was under the impression that he did not know until attending the men's association, and that is when he found out. Whereas in the movie, I would say it seems pretty clear that he knew exactly what this town was, because before going to the men's association in the movie, he lies and he says like, oh, it's only men now. But in 6 months, they're changing that. So you'll be allowed in pretty soon. Meaning Joanna will be allowed in. And after eating the casserole their neighbor makes, Walter then sees that woman's husband checking the mail that evening. And he tells him like, oh, your wife cooks as good as she looks. And this interaction definitely, like the vibe I was getting is that he knew what was going on when he said that. Whereas in the book, Walter agrees that the men's association is sexist. However, he's like, you know what? If we want to change this, we need to change it from the inside out. And so me joining, like, I can help them. I can help get them to see that women should be allowed to be part of this, and how it's so archaic to have it be men only. And so, yeah, I thought that he was sincere with this, and it wasn't, again, until his first night at the association when he seems to find out the truth. But I could be totally wrong. Let me know what you think. But yeah, maybe he did know, because in New York City, we hear that Joanna was part of the women's lib movement. And so maybe, he talked to the right people about his wifely woes and his wife becoming a feminist. And so maybe he did know what was going to happen in Stepford, but it's far more ambiguous in the book. Whereas, yeah, in the movie, I think it's safe to say that he was fully aware of where they were moving to. And in the book, after he goes to the men's association for the first time, he's there until late in the night, and Joanna wakes up and he is back home in bed, and she wakes up to him masturbating. And so she's like, what are you doing? Like, if you want to have sex, you could have woken me up. You don't have to do that. And so they do proceed to then have sex. And Joanna says how it's like the best they've had in a really long time. But of course, the book reader knows like the reason he's so turned on and passionate is because he just found out about the robots and that's what's got him going. And so that it's just kind of sad. And then we hear in the book how over time their lovemaking becomes just like they're going through the motions and there's like no emotion there because Walter is kind of, I feel like he's trying to disconnect from her because he knows that he's going to be killing her off pretty soon. Whereas in the movie, when he comes home from the first night, she wakes up to see him drinking in the living room with teary eyes. And she asks him like, what's going on? And he tells her like, oh, I love you so much. You know that, right? Like, what a pig. And we also see Charmaine's husband like struggling emotionally the night that she is killed and replaced. And then we see him the next day smiling as the court is being torn up. And same with Walter, because the night Joanna is going to be killed, we see he's getting kind of drunk as a way to numb his feelings and, as a way to cope with what is about to happen. But like, if you are going to kill your wife and replace her with a robot, own up to it. Like something about seeing them struggle emotionally with it just makes me all the more annoyed. And I think it's because they're feeling sorry for themselves, right? Like, it's so hard for me to be going through this when it's like you're choosing to kill your wife and replace her with a robot, and yet you're feeling sorry for yourself and having to numb your emotions and, being all shook up, like, ugh. And then another scene I wanted to mention that is not in the book at all, because in the book it is told from, it's like third person, but from Joanna's perspective. And so we do not see what's going on with Walter. We do not see into the men's association at all. Whereas in the movie, we do get a little glimpse into the men's association. But in the movie, we get a scene when he and Joanna are arguing and one of the kids see, and then after Walter sends the daughter away, he tells Joanna, I never wanted them to see us argue. Like as a kid growing up, I would always hear my parents argue, and I swore that wouldn't be the case with my kids. And so we can see why he wants Joanna to be a robot is because he wants to, like, he kind of has good intentions, quote unquote, because he wants to provide a quote unquote better life for his kids, not realizing that, within reason, there's nothing wrong with a kid hearing their parents argue, obviously within reason, but to feel like you need to present yourself as the perfect couple, and my parents, I never heard them argue at all. Like that just is unrealistic. And so he had these unrealistic standards of what he wanted from his own marriage. So yeah, it all comes down to unrealistic standards and wanting someone who is literally not human, because that's the only way you can attain those standards. And in both, after Bobbi has been replaced, Joanna talks to Walter about it, about how there is something wrong and Bobbi is not herself and something has happened to her. But in true Ira Levin husband fashion, Walter gaslights Joanna into thinking that there is something wrong with her. And so he tells her, like, you need to go see a therapist and we're not going to move until you see a professional and talk this out. And in the book, the therapist she chooses doesn't take her seriously and doesn't see this as an emergency. And she writes her a prescription and then is like, well, definitely book more appointments, call me up, and I think we can really work on this. Whereas in the movie, the therapist can see how upset Joanna is, and she tells her, go home, get your kids, and just leave. Don't tell anyone, just leave. And I loved the therapist in the movie so much. And if it weren't for the kids, Joanna could have just left right from there and been safe. And in the book, I'm kind of jumping ahead, but in the book, at one point, she decides, like, I'm just going to have to run away without the kids, and I'm just going to have to believe that Walter wouldn't hurt them. And so part of me in the movie wishes that's what she would have done, because it's like, going back to Stepford, is what caused her demise ultimately. Whereas if she left that night, but I don't know, she would be risking never seeing her kids again, right? So obviously a very tough situation. But yeah, I love this change to the therapist in the movie. And in the book, it just felt like the therapist just saw dollar signs with what Joanna was saying, being like, well, make sure you come back and book more sessions. So she just sees Joanna as someone she can make money off of. and doesn't actually take her seriously. Whereas in the movie, the fact that the therapist is so concerned, it was kind of reminding me of that scene in Rosemary's Baby when they're at the party and Rosemary's friends are telling her, like, this is not right, like something's wrong, and they're trying to help her. And so, yeah, that scene in Rosemary's Baby is so incredible, and it's like probably my favorite scene in the whole story because it's just, it's so heartbreaking. But anyway, I have a video for Rosemary's Baby if you want to hear my thoughts on that one. But yeah, anyway, so basically what I'm saying is I love this change that the movie made. And along those lines, of women standing up for each other and banding together and wanting to help each other. In the book, The Stepford Wives, we have Bobbi, Charmaine, and Joanna who are friends. But Joanna and Bobbi in particular, right, they're bonding over the fact that something is going wrong. And they are validating each other's fears and trying to figure things out and help one another. Similar to Rosemary's Baby, where we got that scene where the women are trying to help Rosemary and they're validating her concerns. And yet in both books, Ira Levin gives this to us only to then take it away. And that's what makes it all the more painful because we see the importance of this connection and bond between these women. And so for it to then be all in vain in both Stepford Wives and Rosemary's Baby is such a gut punch. And again, that's what makes it all so painful. Like, it's so beautiful to see these women wanting to help each other. And yet again, he just takes it away. And it just is so heartbreaking. But to move on to the ending, so in the book, after she sees the therapist, she then goes to Stepford and she goes to the library and she is looking up the old local paper archives. And she reads about how there had once been a women's association. And Diz Koba, he is the guy who was in charge of the men's association. But his wife had once been part of the women's association. But then it got dismantled, and soon after that, the men's association began. Or maybe did the men's association begin, and then soon after that, the women's was dismantled? Now I can't remember, but the two happened very close together. And also the men's association has only been around for 6 or 7 years because Walter had led Joanna to believe the association has been around for a long time. And that's why it's so sexist, is because it was started all these years ago, back when having it be men's only was very normal. And yet, no, it's not old at all. It's only 6 or 7 years old. And then also it's interesting because the Women's Association was dismantled very soon after a feminist author came to speak to the women of Stepford. And so then from here, Joanna goes home and she asks Walter where the kids are. And he's like, oh, they're with a friend. And so she basically runs away and she wants to go see a woman named Ruth Ann, who is a new woman in town who has not yet been changed. However, on her way running to Ruth Ann, the men of Stepford find her and they corner her and they're like, hey, we have a proposition. You think the women are robots? Well, what if we get one of the women to cut themselves? If she bleeds, will that convince you that your fears are unfounded? And Joanna is cold and tired, and she herself is starting to almost doubt her paranoias at this point. She's also thinking, if I'm right, and if they want to kill me and replace me with a robot, why are they not killing me right now? Instead, they're suggesting we go to someone's house. Maybe I am crazy, because we're alone in the dark. They could kill me right now if they wanted to. So she is starting to doubt herself. And so she tells them yes, okay, I agree. And she requests that Bobbi be the one, since Bobbi is her friend. And so the men agree and they take her to Bobbi's house. And then the men stay outside while she goes into the kitchen, and Bobbi is there with this huge knife. And she's like, oh, come here, Joanna, get closer so you can see when I cut myself. And Joanna hears loud rock music playing upstairs, and she's thinking they're playing loud rock music so that the kids won't hear me scream. And then we cut away, and the next scene is Joanna in the grocery store, and she seems pretty clear she has been turned into a robot, implying that robot Bobbi had killed her. Whereas in the movie, so Joanna comes home and asks where the kids are. Walter tells her the kids are with a friend. And then from here, Joanna is able to get away and she goes to Bobbi's house. And she is talking to Bobbi about her fears that Bobbi is not real. And then Joanna gets a knife and she stabs Bobbi, who does not bleed and instead begins to malfunction. And so Joanna is in shock and horror. And after this, she then goes back home, hits Walter, and demands to know where the kids are, and he tells her they are at the men's association. So she goes to the men's association, but once there, she learns it's a trap. And after talking with Diz, she then sees her robot self, and the robot version of her kills the real her. And then again, we end with her in the grocery store, having become a Stepford wife. And I love the ending of the movie. And I think it is so much better to have robot Joanna kill real Joanna versus the book where it's robot Bobbi killing Joanna. Having it be robot Joanna do it was so much better. And of course, that scene is iconic when you see the robot turn her head and she just has the dark eyes. It's just so good. And of course, she has these huge boobs now too. And then also the scene with Bobbi, right, is just fantastic. And it's just so good. I just love this ending to the movie. It's so dark. But yeah, I think it's an improvement on what happens in the book. It's the same ending, essentially. She gets turned into a robot. But the way it happens, yeah, is just so much better in the movie. But also, I like that in both book and movie, the men are not the ones who actually do the killing. And I would wager that they never actually kill the wives themselves and they always have a robot do it. Because that way they can, keep their hands clean, quote unquote, and convince themselves maybe that, we're not murderers since they're not the ones actually doing it. And again, I feel like this showcases their cowardice in the whole thing. I know it sounds weird to say, but the fact that they're so emotional and having a hard time, and then they're not even doing it themselves. They're having someone else do it, a robot do it. Again, it's wow, if you're going to do this, at least commit to it, right? I don't know. They're just such cowards in so many ways, right? But it's also interesting to note that in the movie, her suspicions are confirmed without a shadow of a doubt. Whereas in the book, the whole thing is left open in some ways because nothing is ever officially confirmed. And in the book too, it's sad to imagine what every woman's last moments were like and how many women had suspected something, right? And then they have this moment in the end, like Joanna, who's faced with the truth and the fear of knowing what's coming. Bobbi suspected something was happening. So what were her last moments like? And it's just so tragic and heartbreaking to think about that. And in the movie, we get a scene where Diz tells her in the end that she is the smartest one they have come across and, the most challenging. But I didn't like this added detail, this added line, because again, I don't like the thought that none of the other women have fought this as hard as Joanna did, right? I want to think that nearly every woman suspected something was happening and that she put up a fight, right? I want to think that every one of these women were challenging near the end. And so I didn't like this line in the movie. And it also is kind of cliche to be oh, you're the special one. You're so much smarter than all the others. No, I want to think that every woman was smart and every woman knew something was up and all of them put up a fight. So yeah, anyway, I wasn't a fan of this added line in the movie. And then in the movie, there is a guy who wants to record Joanna speaking. This was in the book as well, because they need the women to record, all of these words, because that is what they use for the robots. But in the movie, she says, if you help me to get the wives to agree to meet together, then I'll do this for you. And so in the movie, this leads to a women's meeting, which starts out very quiet and awkward, when Charmaine then opens up, because this is before she is a robot, and she speaks genuinely about how her husband has never loved her, and he just likes her for her looks. But then one of the robot wives interjects, and she's like, yesterday, I spent so much time cleaning the upstairs floor that I didn't have time to bake anything. And then from here, another robot wife is like, oh, well, have you tried, this cleaning product? And then the robots totally take over the meeting talking about cleaning products, sounding like commercials.
Easy On's really that good, is it?
Is it that good? Well, if time is your enemy, make friends with Easy On. That's all I can tell you. It's so good that if ever I became famous and the Easy On people asked me would I do a commercial, not only would I do it, I'd do it for free. That's how good it is.
Holy cow.
And so I thought this was a great added scene in the movie. And we see how Charmaine was being truly vulnerable and opening up. And this could have led to an actual connection between the women, if they were real women, that is. But since they're not, the conversation is dominated by housework and Charmaine's feelings aren't even validated. And then there is a point when Joanna and Bobbi are talking to one of the wives, and she is telling them, because they're asking her, like, how is this enough for you? Like, you spend all your time cooking and cleaning. Like, why aren't you doing more? But she tells her, like, the robot lady tells Joanna, just because my life isn't good enough for you doesn't mean it's not good enough for me. Being like, don't try to change what I want to do, because this is actually the life I want to live. And that brings me to choice feminism, which is the idea that we should respect whatever choice a woman might make. If a woman wants to devote her life to housework, her choice should be respected as much as the woman who wants to have a career. And this is true to a point, but kind of like what I talked about as far as consent and perfect blue, this isn't a black and white situation in my mind. Because if a woman is raised in an organization, generally, a religious organization, which brainwashes her from youth to prioritize being a homemaker and a mother above all else, then is she truly making her own choice to be this way, or is this just what she has been trained to care about? And there are so many sexist, restrictive religions and organizations out there. And so I don't think it's as easy as saying like, well, it's her choice. And if it's what she wants to be happy, then it should be fine, because it's not that clear cut. Because again, if she's been brainwashed into thinking this is what she wants, is it really what she wants? And should we really be supporting this? Granted, even outside of cults, we are all brainwashed in our own way by the world and the media. So is anyone truly making their own choices, since we're all being influenced by these outside forces, right? And we all want to fit in with our culture and our community. And so I get that, it becomes a greater question where it's like, what is choice? And what is influencing our choices, and who are we truly being what we want? But I think basically my point is that if you are part of a community that will ostracize you if you do not do what they think you should, that's when it seems pretty clear that it's manipulation and potential brainwash, right? And so that's where the issue comes in. And again, there are plenty of religions and things that do brainwash women into thinking that they need to be a certain way and this is what you should prioritize. And they brainwash the men too, but these organizations tend to be very sexist. And so, that hurts men and women both, but the women are the ones who are held down more so. And so I love this line in the Stepford Wives because it's making this very point, right? Because it is not an actual woman saying this, right? Instead, it is a robot woman who has been programmed by men to have this response. And we get this with religious leaders who brainwash women into regurgitating this same response when they are questioned about their goals in life and what they want to achieve. But strangely enough, when the movie The Stepford Wives came out, feminist groups protested this movie, saying that it was sexist. And then even feminist author Betty Friedan, who is mentioned in the book because when they had a women's group, Betty Friedan is who came to speak to them. And it was soon after this that the group slowly became dismantled and the men's association became a thing. But Friedan opposed the movie and called it anti-woman and anti-human. And so I'm honestly kind of baffled by feminist people being upset by this movie. Like, did they not actually watch it? Are they just basing this off of the trailer? Or did they watch it and yet did they just totally miss the point? Like, it makes no sense to me that they would have an issue with it because it's a very feminist film. Like, that's the whole point in many ways. And the timing of this book obviously was perfect, 1972, because the feminist movement began in the late 60s. And so this book shows the fear and the anger men had over this. And it's interesting because they want the women to go back to being the quintessential 1950s housewife. And some interesting historical trivia, the reason the 1950s is when they started to push this housewife appeal, it is because in the 1940s, a lot of women started entering the workforce because they had to, because the men were away fighting the war. And then when the men returned, some of the women stayed in the workforce because they liked it or because they needed the money. And men were not happy with this change, and they wanted to get the women out of there. And so in the 50s, after the war, is when media outlets were pushed into enforcing this image of what they thought a woman should be, showing the perfect housewife as the ideal, in an effort to get them out of the workplaces and back into the house. And then it's so interesting, too, that this book was written by a man, and it makes me wonder, amid this women's liberation movement, was he privy to certain conversations that were had when no women were around? Like, was he hearing men complain and saying this and that? And is that what led him to write this book? It kind of reminds me of the Elizabeth Salander books, which I talked about, because sexism and misogyny is a huge theme in those books, and they're written by a man. And so, yeah, I like books like this that are written by men because I feel like it does give it an interesting look. Obviously, women who write feminist books are wonderful as well. And a woman who writes a feminist book, like, her story will have the perspective of someone who has experienced sexism firsthand, right? But feminist books written by men have their own benefits because women aren't privy to what men say behind closed doors, right? Because they won't say it if a woman is there. And so, yeah, anyway, I just think it's interesting when a man writes such a feminist book, right, that has such horrible sexist men. And it must be based on what they've actually heard from men, straight from the horse's mouth. But some other things I wanted to mention. So the movie adds that the Eberhards have a dog, but after he wanders onto the grounds of the Men's Association, we see him being taken away. But later, when she finds Robot Joanna in the Men's Association, Robot Joanna is living in a replication of their bedroom, and the dog is there. And so initially, I think the dog is a robot, and it shows that the men are moving on beyond just the wives and are now doing this to other things as well, including the dog. But another theory could be oh, this actually is the real dog, and they took him away and brought him here so that he could get used to Robot Joanna. That kind of makes sense, But yeah, I think the dog was another robot. Let me know your thoughts down below. Because the men have gone from not just wanting to control their wives, they're wanting to control more and more. It's this spider web that keeps getting bigger and bigger. Pretty soon they're going to be replacing the kids with robots because they want kids who will also behave well, Also, and speaking of the kids, so in the book, when Bobbi comes back and is a robot, Joanna is talking to Bobbi's kids, being like, have you noticed your mom is different? And one of the kids is like, yeah, I have. I hope she stays this way. And so even the kids prefer her this way, which is just so sad. Whereas in the movie, we don't have that, but we do see Joanna's kids early on get on the bus. And all of the kids are just blankly staring straight ahead at these new kids in town. And that made them almost seem robotic, like they're not being loud and talking or whatever. They're all just kind of sitting and staring. And so you could theorize, one, maybe in the movie, are they saying that the kids also are robots at this point and literally the men are the only ones who are real? Or are the kids acting this way because they're surrounded by women who don't actually have true emotions, and so that impacts the children to behave in unnatural ways, right? Because they're being raised by someone who is inhuman. And so yeah, let me know your thoughts on the kids as far as the movie is concerned down below in the comments. And then it's also interesting because in the book, Diz Koba was married. Again, his wife had been part of the Women's Association at one point before she was turned or before she was replaced. Whereas in the movie, they have Diz be single, which I thought was an interesting change. But then we also have the scene where Joanna and Bobbi walk into a home and they hear the couple having sex, and the woman just seems to be having the time of her life. And we later see this couple, and the man is, as Joanna says, the man is nothing, and yet the woman is stunning. And so in the book, Joanna, after she gets her prescription, she sees this couple at the pharmacy, and she's going on about how wow, Stepford is full of lucky men because all of their wives are knockouts, and they, meanwhile, are so pudgy and bland and bleh. But yeah, anyway, this scene is exclusive to the movie where they walk in on them having sex. And of course, it's become very iconic. And the 2004 movie recreated this scene. However, they added a moment onto the end where the woman comes down the stairs, but they don't see her. But then they see the remote that works her. And so she starts doing rewinding and stuff, which was a bit too silly. But to move on to the 2004 movie, I do like the modern twist here where we see Joanna as a TV executive who produces produces shows that turn couples against each other and makes men feel bad, basically. And after a spurned husband from one of the reality shows tries to kill her, she and her family move to Stepford to start over. And unlike the 70s movie, this movie makes it very clear that Walter has no idea what Stepford is about, so he does not move there with the intent of replacing Joanna, I don't think. But it's quite a coincidence, though, because Joanna eventually realizes that all of these women, they were all high-powered career women whose husbands brought them here in order to turn them into housewives. But at one point, Joanna and Walter are talking, and this is when they move to Stepford and she's hating it. And he's telling her, like, you need to try to embrace Stepford, like, try fitting in, like, drop your New York City persona and embrace Stepford. Stop wearing black. And then she says, like, no more black? Are you insane? And he says, you heard me. Only high-powered, neurotic, castrating Manhattan career bitches wear black. Is that what you want to be? And she says, ever since I was a little girl. And I love this scene in the movie. And this movie does have a lot of funny lines like this. Granted, there is also a lot of humor that just doesn't really land for me personally, but all in all, I do think this is a pretty funny movie. Having said that, there's also a lot of very silly and cartoonish moments that just kind of go over the top. Like there is a scene that was cut, to be fair, this wasn't in the actual movie, but it's a scene when robot Bobbi goes full on Tex Avery and she malfunctions. And I have seen this deleted scene and it was way too much. Of course, the reason this scene must have been cut is because of the rewrites they had to come in and do. It made this scene no longer make sense, which I will get into the rewrites. But we do see another change here is that we see that the women do have their own women's groups. And there's the women's day spa where they all gather together. But I preferred the original where the women never gathered together for anything. Like as ridiculous as their gatherings are here in this movie, they're still socializing. But yeah, I preferred it in the book where they are so isolated. But in the new movie, I wonder if you could think of these women's groups existing because the main woman, played by Glenn Close, ends up being a real woman. And so maybe she has these groups exist for her sake, right? Because she needs that human interaction. Or like it's not even humans though, right? This movie gets a little complicated because I guess technically in the end we find out they are humans. But anyway, she needs that social interaction. Even if the talk is so ridiculous and inane, she would still rather have that than nothing, I guess. But yeah, that is the big reveal here. Her husband, Mike, is the robot and she is the real one. So she caught him cheating on her. And so after she kills him and the woman, she then has the idea like, wow, I know how I can make a couple perfect. And that is to turn the woman into a robot that will be so perfect, the man will never want to cheat on her. And so that is what she does. And she says in the end that her goal was to eventually turn the men into robots as well. And this added detail I did not like at all, because the fact that she eventually wants to turn both of them into robots totally ruins what the Stepford Wives was all about. Like the Stepford Wives was about men wanting to turn their wives into robots. And of course they would never turn themselves into robots. So this little added line just totally ruins the whole point of this story. But this was not the original idea for this movie because originally it ended with her in the grocery store becoming a Stepford wife, like we see in the book and original movie. But test audiences apparently hated this ending, and so they got the cast together and they did a bunch of reshoots, they changed the script, they got rid of other scenes, and we got this final product that we have here. And it causes so many plot issues because in the end we find out that they do not turn into robots, but rather they just get a chip put in their brain, which controls them. And so in the end, we see that Walter, he only pretended that Joanna became a Stepford wife, and really she is just faking it. And so during a party, he goes and he malfunctions all of the chips so that the women become themselves again. But if the women aren't becoming robots, like how could they be an ATM? And what's with the bodies they see in the men's association, right? Like there's so many things that don't line up when you get this reveal that it's just a chip in their brain. And so I hate that they listened to the test audiences and made these changes. Or like, I wish there was a director's cut out there that was the original version of this. And also this movie is only 90 minutes long and it goes through everything way too quickly. Like this should have been at least 2 hours because everything feels so rushed. And so yeah, this movie has so many issues. plot issues, pacing issues. And yet, having said all of that, there is something about it I enjoy, and I do find it entertaining, and it is a great cast. But another complaint I want to mention is that I know this movie is not taking the story seriously at all, but the fact that in the end, once the wives become themselves again, the way they punish the husbands, they stay in Stepford, and the husbands now are just taking on the housely duties. But that was just so stupid. Like, those men should be in jail. And what woman would want to stay with a husband who did that to her, right? Like, even if she's staying with him as a way to punish him, like, she's just punishing herself by staying with this guy. Like, just get out of Stepford, put your husband in jail, and move on with your life, right? So I thought that ending was just so dumb and made no sense. But yeah, anyway, despite a lot of things in this movie not making sense, yeah, like I said, it's kind of a guilty pleasure, and I do enjoy watching it despite its many issues. But then to move on to the 2022 movie. So again, this movie was not marketed as a Stepford remake, and Ira Levin is not credited. But that movie is Don't Worry, Darling. And it does honestly really bother me that Ira Levin isn't credited, because so many plot beats come right from this story. And I would say she took the most inspiration from the 2004 movie. So Don't Worry, Darling is kind of just a more technologically advanced and more serious spin on the 2004 adaptation. And so it does annoy me that the Stepford writers got no credit in Don't Worry, Darling. But when I view this as a modern twist on the story of the Stepford wives, I think this is excellent, and I really did enjoy it, and I liked the Matrix technology twist. The ending, when the lead guy, his wife, kills him and she's like, I'm in charge now, that was kind of silly. And this movie, it's not perfect by any means, but Florence Pugh is always great in these serious, intense roles. These are the kinds of roles that she really shines in. And then I did like, too, how kind of like in the Stepford movie, where the men are struggling emotionally with doing this to their wife, we see here where the husband convinces himself, like, you're happier here, like, this is better for you. You were tired and working all the time in real life, like, you're so much happier now, and I'm doing this for you because I love you. But she tells him, like, I enjoyed working, but also more than anything, like, it's her life, and it's not his place to be making these choices for her. It's not his place to be removing her ability to make a choice. And so the theme of men wanting to take away a woman's choice is prevalent through Don't Worry, Darling, as well as the Stepford Wives movies and the book, as well as Rosemary's Baby. And we see this in the original Stepford Wives movie too, when Walter just keeps making choices without talking to Joanna first, even before she's a robot. And so again, husbands not wanting to treat their wives as equal, and instead wanting to have the executive decision, and who cares what she says, this is what I want, so this is what we're doing. And so they resort to turning them into robots, or putting this fake version of themselves into a computer game thing. And so, just men wanting to be able to call all the shots. And then the podcast or whatever that Chris Pine does outside of the world, but also within the computer world, like his podcast about men's place and how they need to get their roles back, get the gender roles back, whatever. Like, it was very reminiscent to what you hear in today's day and age amongst different men's groups who have such a problem with women who are equal to men. I did not watch this when it came out because it didn't get great reviews, and so I didn't bother watching it. But now that I have seen it, I wish I would have seen it in theaters because I did quite enjoy it. No, it's not perfect, but if you're a fan of the Stepford Wives, it's still worth watching. And yeah, even though Ira Levin isn't credited, I'm just going to think of this as just a remake of the Stepford Wives because that basically is what it is. But then when it comes to book versus movie, so this comes down to the book and the 1970s movie, obviously. And this is actually a really tough call because I love the performances in the movie, and I love that scene with Bobbi in the end. It was so fantastic and so disturbing. I will say in the movie, I thought the scene with her meeting up with her former boyfriend was unnecessary. That was not in the book, and I wasn't totally sure why that was included, but I have some theories. So it's either showing how everybody's unhappy in their relationships, maybe, or is the audience supposed to think that he is going to come in and save the day? Like, are they like, oh, Joanna's going to run to him for help and he'll help rescue her? So maybe he was there to subvert our expectations because he never comes up again at all. And so I think maybe that's why he's there. Yeah, just as a way the audience assumes he will come into play and help her, and yet he doesn't. And so is it just, again, as a way to subvert our expectations? But then I did prefer in the book how Joanna meets the women of Stepford very early on, whereas the movie Joanna does not really meet them until she's already with Bobbi. But in the book, you realize what a breath of fresh air Bobbi is because she has already met so many of these wives and realized what robots they are, right? And so in the movie, I feel like you lose how special Bobbi is because she hasn't met the other wives yet. And I did like the character of Ruth Ann in the book too, who we don't see at all. Like, we get a glimpse of her at the very end. But yeah, we saw more of her in the book, and she, in the end of the book, she is the one that sees Joanna, because throughout the book, we've been in Joanna's perspective, but in the end, we switch to Ruth Ann's perspective, and she sees Joanna in the store, and she's like noticing all these changes within Joanna. But yeah, anyway, so I did like her character, and I was sad we didn't get her in this adaptation. But again, I did love that scene when they get the women together in that meeting and then the robots take over talking about cleaning products. And so, yeah, there's some things I like better about the book, some things I like better about the movie, and yet, ultimately, I am going to say that the movie wins. However, I would highly recommend the book. Ira Levin is a fantastic author. His books always have such a cinematic feel to them. And yeah, I would highly recommend the book, but I think the movie does win by just a little bit. Also, side note, Mary Stuart Masterson is in this movie. She plays the daughter of Joanna and Walter, and the guy who plays Walter is her father. So that's just a fun little side detail. I recently talked about Mary Stuart Masterson because she was in Fried Green Tomatoes. But then also in the end here, I wanted to mention that the reason I am covering Stepford Wives is because August 12th, 2020 was when I posted my first ever book versus movie comparison, and it was for the Stepford Wives. And so in honor of my 5-year anniversary, I thought I would return to it. And back in 2020, Why the Book Wins started out as a blog and a podcast, and I did not start a YouTube channel until a year later in 2021. So my Stepford Wives video is just the audio, so that is why I chose to return to it and make an official video for it. And yes, happy 5-year anniversary to Why the Book Wins, and here's to many more years of book versus movie comparisons. By the way, I have not yet gone back to listen to my original Stepford Wives episode, but maybe after I record this, I'll give it a look because I am curious. I don't even remember which one I said won. I don't know if I thought the movie won or not. Considering it was the first one I ever did, I assume I must have said the book, considering I'm called Why the Book Wins. But yeah, at this point, I would now say that the movie wins as far as the Stepford Wives are concerned. And to end this video, I also wanted to ask the question, who is worse, Walter Eberhardt or Guy Woodhouse from Rosemary's Baby? Even though Walter kills his wife and replaces her with a robot, I'm inclined to say that Guy Woodhouse is still the worst of the two. It's a close call. Obviously, they're both detestable, but yeah, I'm leaning a bit more towards Guy. But let me know down in the comments who's worse, Guy or Walter. But thank you so much for joining me in today's video, and I now need to go finish cleaning the kitchen so that I can then prepare a 7-course meal for tonight's dinner. I just have so much to do, so much housework, so much cleaning, so much cooking. I've been wasting so much time talking about the Stepford Wives. I've just been so lazy, so I really ought to get going. But thank you again for watching this video, and I'll see you next time. Bye.